Shattered words on the floor. Every promise breaks a little more. Hiding pain in the glassy smile.
Elias knew this was the ultimate test, the crucible where his fragile artifice would either harden into belief or crumble into a messy confession. He spent Friday night, not polishing, but carefully applying a third, incredibly thin coat of paint to the critical areas, trying to seal the edges where the old, dark leather was threatening to bleed through. The smell of the paint was so familiar now it was like a perfume of anxiety. The subconscious tension was palpable. He was prepping for a performance where the costume was both the key to his success and the source of his failure. On Saturday morning, Lila met him at the edge of town, looking lovely in a pale blue dress. She looked down, smiled at his feet, and slipped her hand into the crook of his arm, a gesture of intimacy that made his chest ache with conflicting emotions. Joy for her touch and profound guilt for the lie he carried. As they walked, every footfall was a loud event in Elias's mind. He had to keep pace with her, but he was desperately trying to calculate the safest line of travel. When they reached the long, sloping decline that led into the creek bottom, the path was slick with a thin layer of fine, red clay dust, the worst kind of dirt, the kind that stains permanently. As they began the descent, Ben, who had been lingering just behind them with a few friends, let out a loud, theatrical cough. Elias knew he was being watched. He took one step, and his painted shoe slid slightly, picking up a sickening, bright orange smear of clay dust. It was a minuscule stain, barely visible, but to Elias, it was a gaping wound. He stopped dead, his heart pounding, and reflexively bent to scrape the edge of his shoe against a clean patch of grass. Lila squeezed his arm. "Elias? What's wrong? Did you turn your ankle?" Her concern was genuine, but his reaction was a performance of pure desperation. No, he managed, straightening up, feeling the beads of sweat on his forehead. Just felt a rock. He knew he couldn't continue walking like this, performing a frantic, dirt-avoiding ballet while trying to court a girl. The walk itself had become the primary conflict, the physical environment refusing to cooperate with his deception. He looked ahead at the winding path, then back at the perfect, untouched whiteness just below the ankle of his shoe. He realized, with a sudden, devastating clarity, that he was allowing a pair of painted, disposable objects to control his entire life and his relationship with the one person who mattered. The fear of the truth was worse than the truth itself. The suspense had become exhausting. The turning point came when they reached the small wooden footbridge over the creek. The wood was old, wet with dew, and slippery. Lila stepped onto it easily, but Elias hesitated. He saw a knothole right where he needed to place his left foot, a hole big enough to scrape the side of his shoe and potentially gouge the paint right off. Ben, just 10 feet behind, was watching with undisguised amusement. The pressure was overwhelming. Elias felt the fragile shell of his persona crack internally. He looked at the knothole, then at the perfect, painted white, and then, finally, at Lila, who was waiting for him, her face a question mark. In that moment, the exhaustion of the lie outweighed the fear of exposure. He suddenly saw the absurdity of his vigilance, the pathetic dignity of his frantic preservation. He closed his eyes for a split second, feeling the rhythmic, supportive beat of the folktale in his mind. The story must continue, but not this way. He took a breath, stepped onto the bridge, and instead of avoiding the knothole, he placed his painted heel right on the edge of it, grinding the side of his foot against the rough wood with a deliberate, decisive movement. The paint made a loud, unpleasant scraping sound, and a long, jagged strip of bright, familiar brown leather was revealed beneath the pristine white. Lila gasped, a small, startled sound. Ben burst into a single, sharp laugh that echoed in the quiet woods. But Elias didn't flinch. He walked across the rest of the bridge with steady, purposeful steps. When he reached Lila, he stopped, and without a word, he took the edge of the scrape with his thumbnail and peeled away a large, curling flake of the white enamel. Then he did the same to the other shoe, pulling off a strip right across the toe. The effect was shocking. His shoes were now a chaotic mix of brilliant white and cracked, honest, muddy brown leather. They looked like two different lives mashed together, the ugly truth and the beautiful lie. He looked directly at Lila, not at the shoes. "They're painted, Lila," he said, his voice quiet, steady, and utterly truthful. "They were old and falling apart. I didn't have money for new ones. I painted them because I thought you wouldn't talk to me if I looked like me." The air was thick, charged with the sudden shift from suspense to revelation. Ben's laughter died instantly. The truth, once spoken, was a relief so profound it felt like a new strength. The conflict wasn't over, but it had shifted completely from a fight against the external world to a test of genuine character. Lila didn't speak for a long moment, simply gazing at the shoes, then back at Elias's face. The exposed leather was dark and familiar. The white paint seemed loud and artificial now. Elias waited, ready for the scorn, ready for the laughter, ready for the end of the dream. He felt the full, humiliating weight of his deception, but beneath it, a strange, new pride. The pride of a man who has finally owned his reality. Ben finally spoke, his voice less mocking and more confused. "Their house paint," he muttered, recognizing the brittle gloss. The boy painted his boots with house paint. Lila ignored Ben completely. She stepped closer to Elias, her eyes searching his. She didn't look disgusted. She looked thoughtful, a little sad, and then, slowly, a soft smile spread across her face. It wasn't the polite smile he had seen before. It was warmer, more connected. "You did all that," she said, touching the jagged edge of the paint with her finger. "You went through all that trouble and all that worry, just for a conversation?" Elias nodded, unable to speak. "Then I guess," she continued, her voice gaining a strength that matched his new honesty, "I guess you showed me what kind of effort you're willing to put into something you really want. And I guess I like the boy who puts that kind of effort into things, shoes or no shoes." Lila reached down and, with a swift, decisive movement, she scuffed the toe of her own clean, store-bought sneaker hard against a patch of gravel, leaving a definite, visible dark streak. It was a small act of solidarity, a creative synergy that blended their realities. "There," she said, looking up at him with a mischievous glint in her eyes. "Now we both have imperfect shoes. Let's get to the picnic before your cousin Ben has a heart attack from shock." The immediate, external conflict with Lila was resolved not by apology, but by shared vulnerability. The shock was indeed palpable. Ben stood rooted, unable to reconcile the boy who had just admitted to a massive deception with the girl who had just endorsed it. The moment transformed Elias entirely. The pressure was gone. He walked the rest of the way with Lila, no longer calculating the safest path, no longer watching the ground. He stepped carelessly through the grass, feeling the honest dirt beneath the peeled paint, and the sense of freedom was intoxicating. The white shoes were no longer a prison of expectation. They were just shoes, marked by a single, desperate, successful attempt at self-reinvention. The shame was gone, replaced by a confident, easy companionship with Lila. They talked not about the weather, but about the real reason he wanted to talk to her, about the feeling of being trapped and the desperate need to break free. The reaction at the picnic was mixed, as any truth often is. Ben, unable to let the matter drop, whispered the story to a few of his friends, intending to mock Elias. But the mockery fell flat. When people looked at Elias and Lila together, they saw two young people who had just shared a secret, a daring, foolish secret, and the sight of Elias's half-painted, half-cracked shoes sparked a strange kind of admiration. It wasn't the perfection of the white paint they respected. It was the raw, undeniable effort behind the deception. Old Mama Clara chuckled when she saw them, murmuring, My, looks like a little bit of ambition went too far," then came right back home. Her words carried no malice, only the understanding of a life lived close to the bone. The shoes became a symbol, an accidental emblem of what a poor boy would risk for a bit of beauty and a chance at something more. The story of the boy who painted his shoes began to spread, morphing into a tale of romantic courage, not of foolish pride. Elias, emboldened by Lila's acceptance and the community's unexpected, softened reaction, found his voice becoming louder, his opinions clearer. The conflict with Ben fizzled out. Ben couldn't fight a boy who had already admitted his weakness and been rewarded for it. The painted shoes, chipped and scarred, were now ironically more powerful than they had ever been pristine. Lila, for her part, found a new depth in Elias. She hadn't just accepted his lie. She accepted the ambitious, slightly reckless spirit that drove him to create it. She saw that the same desperation that painted the shoes could be channeled into something real. She started encouraging his natural creative instinct, the resourcefulness that turned house paint into a dream. They began spending time together in her father's bakery, not just talking, but sketching, designing, and brainstorming. Lila, who wanted to be a designer, found in Elias a raw, practical partner. Elias, who was excellent with his hands but lacked polish, found in Lila a visionary. Their creative synergy was immediate and profound, a beautiful contradiction of their origins. He helped her build a better display case for the sourdough. She helped him sketch plans for a self-watering garden system for his ma. The painted shoes sat in the corner of his room, untouched, a reminder of the false start that led to the genuine partnership. They were a material access point to the subconscious realization that true self-worth comes not from what you project, but from the lengths you are willing to go to bridge the gap between where you are and where you want to be. The story of the shoes had ended, but the story of Elias and Lila, a story built on honesty, risk, and a willingness to get a little dirty, was just beginning to unfold. The resolution had been achieved, but the story's rhythm continued. Elias and Lila spent the next 6 months inseparable, working on projects that combined her vision and his grit. They designed a series of small, sturdy, well-made wooden toys that Elias carved and Lila painted with bright, non-house colors. They sold them at the general store, and the money was real, honest money. Money earned not through deception, but through true collaborative effort. The success of the toys reinforced the lesson learned on the bridge. The most valuable creations were those built on a foundation of truth and a willingness to show the raw material. Elias's old life of quiet, fearful invisibility was gone, replaced by a busy, purposeful existence. He no longer hid his hands, calloused and stained from work. He used them to build the future. Lila, meanwhile, became more grounded, her head no longer just in the clouds of beautiful ideas, but also in the practical concerns of inventory and pricing. Her acceptance of his humble background had allowed her to shed some of the expectations that came with being the baker's daughter. They were a testament to the powerful, transformative effect of a single moment of honesty, a truth that had been hiding beneath 2 coats of enamel. Their lives were changing, slowly but surely, like the tide coming in. One cold evening, Ben approached Elias again, not with mockery, but with quiet respect. He had watched their success, and the sight of Elias's clean, well-made toys had finally broken through his cynicism. "Elias," he said, kicking at the dirt, "that display case you built for the bakery? It's sturdy. I wouldn't have thought of that kind of joint. You got a knack for it." It was a grudging compliment, the final laying down of the cousinly conflict. Elias smiled, genuinely, easily. "Lila designed it," he said, giving her the credit. "I just knew how to make it last." Ben nodded, then looked down at his own worn boots. "And the shoes," he finally admitted. "That was a brave fool thing to do. Maybe a little crazy, but brave." Elias just shrugged. "Sometimes you gotta be a little crazy to get someone to notice the quiet parts of you, Ben." This moment of mutual acknowledgement cemented Elias's new identity in the eyes of his family and peers. He was no longer the poor cousin, nor was he the boy with the absurd, painted shoes. He was the resourceful young man who worked with Lila, the one who took risks and learned from his mistakes. The story of the shoes was now completely absorbed into the collective memory as a legend of romantic grit, an access point to the subconscious belief that anyone could climb out of their circumstances if they just dared to create a bold enough first step. The momentum carried them further. Lila won a small scholarship to a design school in the city, but she wouldn't go without Elias. They pooled their money from the toy business, and Elias found a job as an apprentice carpenter specializing in custom, detailed work. the kind of work that demanded the exact precision and care he had once applied foolishly to his shoes. The decision to leave the hollow was hard, but necessary. Their ambition had outgrown the small town. As they packed their few belongings, Elias took out the old, half-painted shoes. They were stiff and cracked, covered in dust and flakes of white. Lila picked them up, tracing the line where the lie met the truth. "What do we do with these?" she asked, her voice soft. Elias thought for a moment. "They stay," he decided. "They stay here, so the dust remembers how we left." It was a ritual of closure, a final acknowledgement of their origin. They didn't burn them. They didn't throw them away. They simply left them on the highest shelf in the woodshed. A silent, painted monument to the secret, desperate impulse that had launched their beautiful, unexpected life together. The house paint had long since peeled off most of the surface, leaving only a ghostly white memory clinging to the cracked seams. And so, my friends, that's the tale of Elias and Lila. A story built on 2 coats of paint and a lot of honest courage. They went to the city, they worked hard, and they created a life that was clean, honest, and as sturdy as the best piece of lumber. They often came back to the hollow, and whenever they did, they always looked taller, stronger, and more luminous than before. People in the hollow would point out the woodshed and whisper the story to their children. That's where the boy painted his shoes. That's where he changed his life. It was a repetitive, rhythmic refrain that echoed through the years, a reminder that the greatest tools a person has are not wealth or good luck, but a willing heart and the audacity to create a better version of themselves, even if that version starts as a flimsy, ambitious lie. The painted shoes became the hollow's most beloved folktale, proof that sometimes the simple, common things, a tin of paint, an old pair of boots, a single brave admission, are the very materials that build a better future, one careful, honest step at a time. The end of the story is not a final destination, but the beginning of a long, shared journey, a life of creative synergy and deep, true love.